In D. Gordon's 2012 book Haunted Southend, there is the story of an underpass in Southend-on-Sea in Essex, which is said to be haunted by a mutant half-man, half-rat entity. There are two prominent variations on how the Ratman came to haunt said tunnel. I will go over both of them and then give my opinion on whether or not I think the story is true or just another urban legend. The most well-known version of the story involves an elderly homeless man who was said to have utilized the underpass to escape from the cold winter nights. Simple things like walking was a struggle for him. One night, according to this version of the story, he was approached by a group of drunken teens who proceeded to beat the old man nearly to death. They also stole his blanket, which was the only thing he had to keep warm. As he lay dying from his injuries, begging for help, it is said that he was then attacked by a pack of hungry rats that gnawed on him until he succumbed to hypothermia and blood loss. Over the course of the night, his corpse was feasted on by the numerous rodents and vermin that lived in the shadows of the underpass and nearby sewers. One grisly detail suggested that the old man's face was almost entirely gnawed off by the rats. It is the spirit of this man, assuming a grotesque rat-like form, that is said to haunt the Southend underpasses, accessways, and sewers, attacking anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. He's described as having long nails or claws, hunched over with a mouthful of yellow teeth, basically a human-sized rat standing on two legs. He can be heard squealing and scuffling about in the dark shadows. An alternate version of the story, this one apparently propagated by children in the area's schools, involves the Ratman being a flesh-and-blood creature, as opposed to a ghost, the product of an adulterous former mayor of Southend, whose affair with a woman bore a cursed child so hideous that it was abandoned to the sewers and underpasses, where it eventually grew up to become a dangerous feral, half-man, half-rat monster. He's said to have an elongated snout and the worm-like tail of a rat. According to the story, he's also supposed to be fond of the taste of human flesh. Other versions of this particular story involve the mayor building the underpass with a secret cell where he kept the child locked away. He is said to have found a way to escape from his cell at night, and that's when he stalks the tunnels. Urban legends are in most cases the retelling of stories that are said to be true, passed from friend to friend or parent to child, involving a cousin of an aunt or a friend of a friend. Generally, the narrators will add his own spice to the mix, with each subsequent telling and retelling. Generally, urban legends are rooted in the fear of the unknown. Sometimes they work as cautionary tales. Often the stories are at least somewhat believable, and the narrator conveys that they believe it to be true. The Southend Ratman story is so far-fetched that it's hard to take it as anything more than a story that has been overly embellished, most likely originating with a person stumbling across an oversized rat in the underpass, which ultimately, thanks to successive retellings, morphed into something else entirely. A big rat suddenly becomes a, depending on the version of the story you believe, a sinister spectral Ratman, or a mutant teenage human chomping rat monster. Sadly, as with most urban legends, there are no dates and very few actual sighting reports to go by in order to back up the claims made in the stories. That doesn't mean there are no reports of people encountering the Ratman entity. In D. Gordon's book, there is an account by a man named Bradley Vaughn, in which he claims that several of his classmates were frightened out of the tunnel after hearing a bizarre scream, followed by the sound of long nails scraping on the wall. In July 2010, there was an account posted to the Echo News forum, in which a witness claims they too heard the sounds of scratching on stone, as if something was running its clawed hands on the wall. In a 2009 post to the Essex Paranormal forum, a person using the handle The Fits described her encounter with the Ratman one night while returning home from the bar. When I was a little girl, I used to live in Southend-on-Sea, a seaside town in England. This was before my family moved to Basildon. I had a lot of friends here, a lot of boys who lived near me, and they were typically into gross and crazy stuff, as boys of a certain age often are. We all went to the same school, and I heard them talking about the Ratman story. What I heard was that someone important had a bastard son, a deformed, malevolent child, who they would do anything to hide. My friends said that he had been walled up in the tunnel and was only let out at night, peering through secret doors, and that he had become cannibalistic. So if you were under there at night, he would jump out and try to kill you. Even back then, I was a bit too smart for my own good. Whenever they were talking about it, I would step in and correct them. No, there are no such things as Ratmen. No, they don't lock deformed people in tunnels. No, we don't have cannibalistic monsters in Southend. I had to laugh at them and their crazy story. It really was ridiculous. Well, as life moved on, I regrettably lost contact with these friends. I was out of town and they probably moved on too, and I forgot that stupid little yarn I heard them telling in the playground. But that was until the summer of 2004. We would always see my grandmother, R.I.P., on her birthday, which meant going to Southend. Usually this was for less than a day, but this time we stayed a little longer. I had a chance to go out and have a drink with some mates and generally have a good time in the place I grew up. When we filed out of the pub, it was dark and time to go home. I was walking alone, and rather than cross a busy road and, in my inebriated state, get splattered, I decided to go under the tunnel. In the daytime, it's not a very pleasant place, as you can probably imagine. It's filled with graffiti and seems to smell of urine and old kebabs. But at night it's downright creepy. I may have been somewhat tipsy, but I still had the wherewithal to know this place was dangerous. There's just something fishy about it. Unfortunately, I couldn't walk very briskly. My stomach was playing up, and I proceeded to leave a ghastly, beige pile of vomit against the wall. And that's when I heard it. There was no one else coming. I would have heard their footsteps. No cars above either. But I heard a sound behind me in the darkness. It was a mix between a gurgle and a hiss. Honestly, it sounded like an angry rabid baby. No, I was imagining it. That's what I told myself. But then it came again. A hideous snarl that sounded almost human in its delivery. I didn't know what that was. I just knew I wanted to leave. So, with puke still dripping from my chin, I hightailed it out of there. And to this day I still remember that night, and how utterly terrified I felt. How it seemed like the bottom of my stomach had given way. How it felt like I was being watched, being sized up. Now, I no longer laugh at that story, or those who believe it. Don't go under there at night. Whether or not you want to believe the Ratman of Southend is real or just a made-up story is up to you. That said, I don't plan on hanging out at the Southend-on-Sea underpass anytime soon. I do a story about a giant mutant rat. You just knew I was going to follow it up with a half-man, half-turtle story. Because, well, why not? And yes, such a story does exist. In Eldridge James's 2015 book, Creepy Cases, Humanoid and Cryptid Encounters, a man by the name of Kent Pickman claims he encountered just such an entity in June of 2000, just outside Athena, Oregon. At the time, Kent claims that he and his friend Alex were returning to Alex's house after their graduation party. Alex was driving while Kent was seated in the passenger seat. As they made their way down a desolate stretch of road, the headlights of their vehicle caught sight of something strange. Both boys watched as a weird-looking creature stood up in a ditch and walked off into a nearby field. The two excitedly described what they saw, each confirming to each other that what they saw was real and not some trick of their eyes. Kent claims that the creature they saw was a, quote, Turtleman. They described that it had long arms and long legs, and its back was covered with a giant turtle shell. Quote, like a Ninja Turtle. Alex took special note of its clawed hands, something Ken admitted that he also noticed. When they arrived at Alex's house, they quickly told his parents, who seemed to dismiss their sighting. In the years following the sighting, Ken has tried to track down other Turtleman reports in the area where he had his sighting, but has come up empty. I did some research on creature encounters in Oregon and came across the creature of the dump. It was about a big worm with human-like blue eyes, so obviously it had nothing to do with my sighting, but the sighting did occur close to Helix and Athena, Oregon. There are also reports of cowmen and horsemen in the area. When it comes to my research on the internet goes, my friend and I are the only ones who have encountered a Turtleman. I too did some research, and from what I can tell, Kent is correct. I could not find another report of a half-man, half-turtle being sighted anywhere. It seems to be a one-off. Is it possible that this was a prank? I guess. Not sure why a guy in a turtle costume would be hanging out by the side of a desolate road in the middle of the night, waiting to scare somebody, but I guess it's possible. Is it possible that they encountered a bear that had somehow gotten tangled up in a leftover tent or a lawn chair, and they mistook it for a turtle shell? I guess that's possible too. That said, both of them apparently got enough of a look at the creature to believe that it was a giant bipedal turtle man, and who am I to say they didn't see that? I have to admit, I grew up reading Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, and I saw all the movies, and the geek in me loves the idea that maybe, a giant human-sized sewer rat and a giant bipedal turtle might actually cross paths one day.